Hi, so let's get started. I'm Dr. Arlen Meyers. I'm with the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs and an advisor at NI10. So welcome to this office hours. Let me just go through a couple of housekeeping issues. Number one, this is an open sort of ask me anything. It's your opportunity to bring things up, talk about things, have a discussion, and maybe share some stories or ideas or things that you're working on. And second, if you have a question or a chat or a comment or you want to say something or chime in, then feel free to do so. The intent of this session, and I'm hoping that we're going to have our guest speaker who may or may not be able to join us because of some emergency issue, has to do with AI law. And the issues really have to, and we can deviate from that and sort of skirt around it, but the issues really have to do with what are the issues concerning liability in artificial intelligence in healthcare. I'm not a lawyer, but I have participated in previous lives as an expert witness and in various medical legal issues, both. And my understanding is there's basically two issues and two spheres that we need to discuss when it comes to AI liability in the law. One is medical malpractice as it involves the use of artificial intelligence. And the second has to do with product liability, which has to do with the use of artificial intelligence. And again, I'm no lawyer, but the issues are different. The burden of proof is different. And the processes are somewhat different. So I have participated in both. I've participated, and I've been sued twice. So I'm a recipient of a malpractice suit. I've participated as an expert on the plaintiff side and the defense side in med mal cases, and I participated in product liability as an expert. So if anyone else has experience in those spheres, let us know, because we're interested in your thoughts or sharing whatever your experience happens to be in AI liability. So Harvey, do you have any comments as far as what's going on in the world of large language models and AI liability?
Yeah, I love what Dr. Anthony Chang has talked about. I feel like damn if we do, damn if we don't scenario. That's kind of where we're at. Well, let's start by saying there's some situations where if we're using AI, obviously the whole point is to save lives and help. And I'll give you a quick case in point. As an ER doctor, when seconds count, having an AI model to help read a CAT scan, and this is an actual product that's out there, that if someone walks in with symptoms of stroke, it'll be able to say, hey, this patient's having a bleed, and be able to text the radiologist, the ER doctor, and say, hey, put this at the top of your list, and say across the street they don't have that. Then I could see in a future where a lawyer will be like, wait, this is the standard of care. This is what should have happened. And then there's your scenario where we get sued for not using it, and obviously vice versa. So that's kind of where I see when I talk to my colleagues, kind of where we're at.
Yeah, there's a recent article about a lawsuit that involves third-party radiologists screening films using artificial intelligence. And the issue had to do with, in my understanding of the case or the fact pattern, a person showed up in the emergency room, an emergency room doctor ordered an image. The image was analyzed using artificial intelligence and screened by an outside Nighthawk sort of remote teleradiologist. Things went south. The plaintiff sued the teleradiologist, who I don't know where that person was. And the issue initially had to do with, did the plaintiff have a cause of action given this strange new emerging fact pattern of Nighthawks, remote telemedicine, AI? And the answer is yes. So the case went forward, and as I understand it, actually the plaintiff won and was given a substantial judgment. So these are the kinds of issues that tend to come up, and the case law is emerging as we speak. I think there's some generalizations that are emerging. One is you can't sue AI. You can't sue Dr. Watson. AI is not a person. And these are as I understand the decisions. So you can sue a person using AI, but the ultimate decision maker is the doctor. And so that's basically the main thing. So Bill, are you on? Bill, are you on?
Yeah, I'm on. I'm sorry. I have an emergency meeting, so I'm on my way to that.
I see.
And I can, yeah,
All right.
I can speak till 10:15, so my apologies. But
All
this
right,
just
so
came up. Yeah.
Can you give us the quick and dirty on what are the top headlines you want people to know about artificial intelligence liability? And let's just stick to the malpractice side, not the product liability side, because you don't really have much time. But what do you want people to know?
I think the most important thing is that you can have a systematic failure with AI. One MRI machine can go down, and that's one patient for one session. But if you have, an AI-enabled system, then everything goes down, and there's, serious injury if that's what it takes, as well as just interruption in procedures.
So, whose ox gets gored?
The hospital. It's systematic failure.
And so can the doctor or will the doctor be sued too?
I doubt it, because it's a machine failure.
And how do you prove that? What's the burden of proof?
I'm not sure what the burden of proof is, but the evidence would be everything went down at once, so it couldn't have been down to an individual doctor.
Well, if a doctor relies on a clinical decision support system through an AI engine that is part of his or her employment, place they work, and things go south, then who gets sued?
Well, I don't think it's the individual doctor in this case, because it's a systematic failure independent of an individual decision or an individual operation of a machine.
Right, but more and more hospitals and EMRs are plugging in clinical decision support systems to inform clinicians at the point of care. So if a clinician uses that information to make a decision and things go south, then what happens?
Then it's a doctor. I was proposing a different hypothetical.
Right, but let's kind of talk about the doctor one. And so what should a doctor know or do to avoid that circumstance? First of all, they may not even know that AI is running in the background, but what should they do? What are the do's and don'ts of the clinician on the front line?
Well, I think it's still a standard of care. I just want to sidestep just a little bit because of time. I think a lot of AI machinery or systems that are being used expressly say that there has to be human involvement in the loop. And that's the excuse for the manufacturers to say that the machine is not designed to be used without human supervision. In that case, it puts it back to the doctor for the standard of care and failure to stop the procedure in the event of a malfunction.
So if you're a vendor and you're in a system trying to pick a vendor who is selling an AI product or service in healthcare, is it just, hey, here it is, it's been approved by, software as a medical device, whatever, by the FDA, and it's up to you to use it just like any other tool, so don't blame me if things go wrong?
Yeah, I think that's the short answer. The long answer is when the vendor anticipates that and tries to build in protection to make it clear that it's a doctor failure.
And when it comes time to negotiate or to choose a vendor, should that be a point of discussion and the terms and conditions of integrating it as such?
I think so, because a lot of those times are just exculpatory and they're not realistic.
Okay. And any advice on how to do that? Like, no, we're not going to buy your product because if something goes wrong, it's on us, or what should we do?
Well, in my position, I would start making exceptions to the exceptions.
Depending on who you're defending, whether it's the company or the hospital.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. Any questions before Bill has to drop off from the group?
And I'm sorry for the last minute notice. I hope you understand this is just some client thing that came up and I'm walking down the hall. Yeah.
Sure. No, we get it. We bill by the hour, so we'll send you a bill.
Okay. It's all right. I bill by the quarter hour, so there we go.
Yeah, I know. Right. So any questions from the group, or anybody want to put anything, raise your hand or say anything, or before we turn it over to the wisdom of the masses?
I have a question in the chat about a disclaimer. If you want.
Yeah, you want to. So thanks, Parag. So what if there is a disclaimer, use clinical correlation when a decision made by doctor using AI is wrong? So is that pretty much what we just discussed? Yeah, it sounds like he dropped off. And I apologize for that, but stuff happens. I think the bottom line here is a couple things. One is, can you be sued for not using it? And what happens, or versus using it? And if there is any kind of disclaimer, which will be in the vendor language, whose responsibility is it, and who's liable? And again, I think what he said and what my understanding is ultimately the doctor, just like any other tool, the product liability issue really has to do with what is a reasonable expectation of the user in terms of safety and efficacy of this product. I mean, if you buy a coffee machine and the coffee machine produces coffee that burns you, like that old thing in the McDonald's, they were giving coffee and the cups were too hot, so people were suing McDonald's. There's a reasonable expectation of product performance that the average person would expect. That does not, I don't think, apply to, is it a reasonable expectation that this AI engine will make the decision for you and that you should rely on it? No. It's like Google, the example I always use is Google Maps is telling you to make a left-hand turn, and you know damn well you should be making a right-hand turn. And you make the left-hand turn, and this is an actual instance, you wind up going over a cliff into a ravine. This actually happened. The person didn't say, no, I know I'm not supposed to do that. So it's ultimately up to you, doctor, to do the right thing. And thanks for posting that, Harvey. So these are the issues. Harvey put it up in the chat about liability and essentially what are the causes of action. So this is what happens that justifies a suit. Now, let me remind you that, and if I'm speaking to the choir, forgive me, or another lawyer in the crowd. Is there another lawyer in the crowd, just so I understand, so I don't say something stupid?
Well, unfortunately, this one has to leave. So,
all right. Well, what's the answer to do you have the answer to his question?
I think it's more complicated than that. I think if, you had a doctor can't be ultimately responsible for the failure, of a very complex machine. That's just, I think, an unrealistic thing. Just like, a car driver can't be responsible if the brakes fail. That becomes a a question of what should be anticipated and, how did you recover from an accident? So I think AI clears this up. I just want to say one more thing before I leave, and I'm sorry to be rude about this, but I think when AI establishes protocols, especially used, in an ambulance or something like that, the advantage of AI is there's quick dissemination of best practices. I think the danger is when the best practices become embedded and they're superseded, but people are still following them because AI generated a list. And then I think that becomes a very interesting question about whether a physician has kept up with best practices, even though there's an outdated protocol.
So short answer before you leave. Is the use of AI to make clinical decisions the standard of care?
Are you asking, can the doctor ultimately escape it? Then the answer is no, unless, some of my hypotheticals are beyond the control of a physician. What would happen if the electricity went out in the hospital?
Okay, well, good luck in your meeting.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thanks for understanding. It's just lawyer's life. All these things come up. So I look forward to the next session, and I have to leave. I have to leave. So I will do that as gracefully as I can. Thanks again.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Okay. So do institutionally, so there's an iPhone 80 question. iPhone 80.
Hi, Pete Calderon here. I apologize.
That's okay.
I come from Vendorland. I work at a company called MD Clone. We derive synthetic data. I'm a happy participant and listener here, but just learning a lot from liability here.
Oh, good. So as a vendor, so actually, why don't you ask your question first, and then I want to ask you some questions.
Sure. Yeah. So I deliver a big data platform that allows end users to build synthetic data sets on the fly with that are longitudinally derived from data lakes.
And just forgive me for interrupting you, but just so, because there's some people that are just sort of getting in this game. So define synthetic data.
Sure. So there are different flavors of synthetic data. One of which is kind of a perturbation approach, which is basically a statistical avatar of original data where we kind of redistribute rows and columns to maintain statistical properties. There are also generative AI approaches to deploying or creating synthetic data sets for either specific use cases or samples of data sets or even simulation exercises for patient cohorts, all in the kind of foundation for creating AI test beds. So we can create safe data environments that are statistically representative of larger populations that get you to maybe 80 or 90% of an effect size as opposed to, just the 10% standard that we go to or even less for whatever is available in testing. And so my question is derived from being able to create basically these artificial derivatives. But the AI or machine learning that is created or learned from those test data sets eventually become production data sets, and we can do things like try to predict suboptimal starts or for vascular access and chronic kidney disease or other things. And I'm curious to know, in the absence of a federal standard, I know we have CHI, I know we have ABAIM and others who are building frameworks. I think the liability lives in the institution today for what they develop for their own populations if they are that forward thinking. And it is interesting to understand, does every algorithm or does every machine learning model have to go through an FDA approval process, or is this really an institutionally derived directive to make things explainable and transparent?
Okay, so let's just back up 1 minute. What is the difference between synthetic data and digital twins? Or are synthetic data used to create digital twins?
So that would be my response. is that synthetic data can be used to create digital twins. There are also simulation exercises, but yes, there are many vendors out there that call synthetic data digital twins as well.
Okay. So, given the issues, and as I understand your question, it's so an institution, a given institution, wanting to integrate and disseminate artificial intelligence has a make or buy decision. They can either do it in-house or they can buy it outside from a vendor like you, correct?
Yep. So,
Sorry.
so they and so they can do it in-house and use.
Sorry,
mostly
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You're breaking up, and your video's frozen.
I apologize.
Yeah, maybe you turn off your video, and maybe that'll give you some more bandwidth. Yeah.
Yeah,
So try that.
I'm no, I apologize. So yeah, so it is in-house. There are open manually, and there are also products out there like mine where you can build a platform on-prem and build synthetic data sets on your own.
Right. And my understanding is that as AI becomes cheaper, better, faster, smarter, and more democratized, more and more people and institutions are going to be able to do their own, make essentially bespoke platforms and algorithms, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So in the circumstance where you are creating, so my understanding of your question is, in the situation where the institution decides to make its own algorithm, and incidentally, Epic is now opening up their platform to customized, bespoke, essentially AI APIs. So that if you are the university of whatever, or not even that, if you're so-and-so community hospital, and you create your own algorithm with your own test training data, and then you create an algorithm out of that training data that is unique to your situation and integrate it into your Epic platform. So that's your question, as I understand it, is who's liable?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, yep, exactly.
Okay. So I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, we don't know yet. I guess would be my answer, because all of this is sort of working its way through the food chain. But again, like our friend the lawyer is going to say, it depends. And it's going to depend, on a lot of things like the fact pattern. You as the vendor, what do, or if you were a vendor that did this, let's take the example of you were hired by my hospital to integrate your system into my record. As a vendor, are you the CEO of this company?
No, I'm a VP of customer success, but so I'm the delivery guy.
Okay, but you're a member of the management team. You're a member of the founding team. Okay. Someone has to take responsibility from the vendor perspective to think through these issues, product liability issues, whether the FDA approves it or not, or requires it or not, correct? Is that correct?
That's the way I approach it, which is why I asked the question. I think there is a level of integrity as we partner with our customers, right? That we want to also commit to transparency and explainability as frameworks unfold. I think the Epic question is really important because I've worked with 7 academic health systems all with Epic, where their builds and their rows and columns and their sources and workflows are totally localized. So there isn't a whole lot of standardization amongst them, right? So those localized algorithms make sense to a certain extent.
Okay, so you don't have to tell us anything you don't want to tell us, but give us some understanding of the kinds of conversations that are going on from vendors concerning this issue. So what have you guys or women concluded concerning, and this is all about if you're a vendor creating a product, you need some sort of risk management process. And one of the risks is product liability. So how have you resolved that issue, or where are you right now?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer because really what we're doing is creating transparency by monitoring the efficacy, monitoring bias, monitoring transparency, and trying to follow what some of the institutional groups are doing, like ITSM or other standardization bodies there are. But my sneaking suspicion is that the federal government is not going to necessarily take a huge stance on how to deploy AI at the institutional level. Maybe they will, but really I think a lot of that liability lives in the relationship between the institution and their governance or guidance around what is acceptable use and what is the vendor's responsibility in terms of liability or partnership in that process. If I give you a platform and you deploy a model on your own without me, am I, as the software vendor, liable for that? I don't think so. But at the same time, I want to be aware and cognizant of that.
Well, as you know, there's been a lot of, so thanks for that. So my understanding of your answer is we're not sure yet.
Exactly. But trying to be careful and be careful and trustworthy.
Right. So, and there's a lot of conversations going on from many different perspectives. One is, and this has to do with responsible use and oversight and standards of care. One is, what standards should AI vendors comply with? Number two is, what standards should end users, that is clinicians, comply with? And the third is, what rights do the patients have to understand what is being used in their care? So I call this rules, rights, and regs. The regs have to do with the vendors. The rules have to do with, the rights have to do with the patient, et cetera. So we're still in the process, like patient bill of rights, AI bill of rights, all that stuff. And every country, and there's like a bazillion people doing this all over the place, in government and industry and specialty associations and vendor halls, all that stuff. I mean, there's an AdvaMed meeting going on in Toronto in a couple of days. And a lot of it is going to be about AI and medtech. So I stay tuned, I think, is the answer. So Greg, do you want to make a comment or ask your question or talk about something?
Well, I think I'm. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I can't tell on the phone. So my piece is kind of a follow-up of Harvey's comment, which talks about something that Anthony's mentioned. I'm not sure that while the MRI or CT add-on interpretation is one thing, I think more likely something in the short term that's going to happen is you have a sepsis functionality in your fill-in-the-blank EHR that's been shown to be effective, and you don't have it on. Not that it's suggesting something and you don't do it, but it's been turned off, but it's available to the hospital. Is there a liability for that, which would be a kind of a similar situation as it suggests something and you don't do it, but I think there's more standard pieces. So at what point does the AI functionality become standard of care? With Epic putting out a fair amount of functions and it being such a standard part of large institutional EHRs, is that going to be the de facto standard of care?
Right.
If you don't have it turned on and it's available, are you as an institution or as an individual acquiring a liability?
Right. So the question is, who decides what is the standard of care? And that comes down, in my opinion, again, I'm not a lawyer, to a jury or a judge in a court of law that basically builds a foundation of policy that evolves over the course of law. So a similar situation, I mean, every specialty, but for example, a parotidectomy and facial nerve paralysis, or thyroidectomy and recurrent laryngeal nerve paralysis in my specialty. Now, just because there are 15, and I'm making a number up, facial nerve monitors on the market that that you can use to monitor whether you're going to injure the facial nerve or find the facial nerve or deal with it during a superficial parotidectomy to prevent facial nerve paresis or paralysis. Now, just because that instrument is there does not necessarily mean you have to use it. In other words, turn it on. So in this case, my case, is using a facial nerve monitor during a superficial parotidectomy or parotid surgery the standard of care? And if you don't use it, are you liable? I've been in circumstances to testify as a defense witness for or against. And of course, everything I say, I would say no. And you go into all the details about the positive predictive value in the literature, and does it work and doesn't it, and what good is it, and all the reasons to and not use it. But at the end of the day, it's really about what's the jury going to believe, or the judge, and if it's a bench case. And I think we're in the same circumstance with artificial intelligence. So just because it's there, and actually, I think there's a more compelling argument that artificial intelligence and its predictive validity is still in evolution. I would think the weight of the evidence would be, just because it's there doesn't mean, A, that you have to use it, whether it's turned off or not, turned on or not. And secondly, at the end of the day, it's up to the doctor to decide what to do given what AI is telling him or her to do. But I just think it's again up to the jury. So does anybody else have a comment on this? Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Arlen. So, a lot's gonna transpire over the coming years and decades around this. But the other way I've looked at things is, even outside of sort of the predictive ability of AI to say something might happen to a patient based on data or whatever, it's just this notion that medical information in general, studies, research, et cetera, is doubling, used to double every 20 years, and it's now doubling every, whatever they say it is, 20 days or whatever number you want to put on it. And the thought that AI can be a better clinical decision support tool. And, again, the fact that I'll add on to the medical information doubling, every 2 months or whatever we want to say it's doubling at, is the fact that it takes 10 years on average, 10 or 12 years, if I'm remembering the statistic right, for a new concept on an evidence-based concept on how we should be treating a condition becomes mainstream.
Yeah, I think that the usual convention wisdom is 17 years.
Yeah, that long, right? So when we start potentially having the ability of AI to give us maybe better, more timely recommendations into how we manage a certain condition, and we're not doing it,
Right.
then where's that liability? Because we're still doing something that's
Right.
dated, though still considered standard of care.
Right.
It still may be considered standard of care the way I'm doing something today, because that thing that we have found out is still 17 years away from me understanding it, unless I have AI. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let me just remind the group that the stethoscope, the single tube with the ear thing, was invented in the 1830s, something like that. And it took like 50 years for it to be incorporated into medical practice on a routine, what we would call, now obviously it wasn't the same exact tool, but using a stethoscope to listen to somebody's chest took, I think, 50 years. So the good news is the time frame is getting shorter, but 17 years is a long time. Now you could argue, that's ridiculous. That's just common wisdom. It's really not true. There's, some examples of early adoption of things that have accelerated sooner, but that's the idea. And I would remind, secondly, people that the iPhone was launched 17 years ago in 2007. And my question is, could anyone have predicted the impact of that phone on how we live today? No. So I'm thinking it's the same thing with what we're talking about now. No one can possibly predict what artificial intelligence is going to do to the practice of medicine, similar to the intended and unintended, because the unintended consequence of a cell phone is social media. And we all know that there are unintended consequences of social media as an example. And no one could have predicted that. So that's where I think we are. Susan, you've had some questions and some ideas. You want to chime in?
Well, I just had some questions. We're using AI now, maybe in our documentation, or maybe eventually I'm going to use AI to make medical decisions. And I'm learning more and more about it, thanks to all the people online and Dr. Castro as well. Will I be liable? And how are malpractice carriers dealing with the onset of AI?
So maybe you could give folks a little explanation of your background and where you're coming from.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a pediatrician in practice, and I actually have a startup for early childhood identification of early childhood developmental delay and intervention. That's what I'm doing. And so I'm still practicing. I'm an active practitioner right now, and I'm using AI in my practice to study what could this disease process be, etc. And it certainly helps when you're puzzled about why this child's presenting in that way. And of course, I'm asking, eventually you're going to be using more and more wearable devices and so forth. And the patient's going to ask, well, how did you get this information? Well, I used AI. So comment on what we can say and what we can't say to patients without getting sued in case we've overstepped that.
Right. So you've asked a couple of questions. One has to do with how is the radiology specialty dealing with this issue? Second is, what are medical students and residents and fellows being taught about the use of AI in radiology? Third is, what about the malpractice carrier, and how does this impact their premiums, basically? Is that correct? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. I mean, I think that's a good question.
Okay. Are the radiologists in the gang? Is anyone a radiologist in this call who is dealing with this in the trenches? Okay,
Well,
so I can.
how
Go
about
ahead.
ER doctors? The ER doctors that go in and they read the X-ray because there's not a radiologist there that day, so they have
Right.
AI read the ultrasound.
Right, and I think I mentioned at the beginning that so my general take on this, just as, again, I'm not a radiologist, but I sort of follow this stuff. The basic idea is artificial intelligence, my understanding, in terms of the business function and workflow of radiology, is being used fairly extensively, and particularly billing, the number of images that a given radiologist needs to read, off-hour readings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of that has to do with workflow. But again, it's the ultimate responsibility, whether the film is being read by the resident at 2 a.m. or a fellow, and then checked when the attending shows up in the morning. It's still the ultimate responsibility of the responsible radiologist to oversee the final decision. And if that falls through the cracks, then the buck's going to stop with the attending. In terms of the malpractice carrier, I think that that is that's a moving target, because obviously the malpractice carriers want to pay out as little as possible. So the way I see this playing out is that this reminds me of using certain technologies and getting privileges to use it. So it's not good enough to get hospital privileges. Now you have to attest to the fact that you have appropriate competencies to use a given technology. So for example, robotic surgery. For example, lasers. And it's not just, can you use a laser, or should you be able to use a laser on somebody? It's which one? Because there's lots and lots of different kinds of lasers for different indications. So I think ultimately, and this gets down to AI credentialing. So how do we credential people, or should we credential people to use artificial intelligence taking care of patients? So what say ye? What do you think we should do about that? So let's say you're the medical director of some group practice or medical staff office, and you have concerns about the competency of your people to use artificial intelligence. Should they be credentialed?
I think they need something. I mean, I'm not going to come out and say they have to be credentialed, but maybe. I mean, I think they need training. A lot of community physicians didn't want EHRs. They felt that was, and I including, didn't want to go on it. But it's been really helpful and better for the patient and better for me in general. So I think we need to all get educated. It's not just doctors. We have to educate our patients about the role of AI as well. And the more we know about it, the more we can help our patients use it responsibly, like social media, which is what I do every day with my pediatric patients.
So you're saying yes, or, I mean, we're not going to hold you to this, but should doctors be credentialed to use artificial intelligence?
You're asking me?
Yeah. What would you? So yeah. I mean, if I were the medical director and I said, look, we appreciate what you're doing and you're doing a great job, and artificial intelligence is being used in our hospital, but we feel that you need to be credentialed to use it.
Well,
and what would you say?
I'm going to get credentialed with Dr. Anthony Chang's course. I'm going to do it for myself, for sure. But I think.
Well, let me just interrupt you with that point. So, and I'm not talking out of school because Anthony and I are like joined at the hip, and Harvey knows this. And we've had this conversation. Being educationally credentialed. In other words, God bless Anthony and everybody who's involved with ABIM. It's an important addition to what, and good for him. But simply because you took a course and passed it, and you got a credential that said you did that, does not mean you are competent to use it. I'm sorry. We all know that. Education does not necessarily change behavior. So good for you. The initial step is education. Sure, nobody's going to argue with that. My point is, so it's like my saying, you know what? I went to I did an online course in using a CO2 laser for the management of laryngeal, whatever. And now I want to do a case on Monday. And I've been in that situation and asked to attest to this stuff. So my view is simply because you are educated in something does not mean you are competent to use it. So then the question, so do you agree with that statement? And this is all about patient safety and quality. So if you're the chief safety officer for a hospital, and somebody says, we need a process to make sure people are competent to use this, what would you say? Anybody in the group? Harvey, do you have any comments about this?
No, I just posted on the group there that yes, I see your point where we're going, and there is a difference of just knowing the technology versus being competent. I think my earlier comment is this technology is exponential, and our organizations are logarithmic to the point where it's going to be really tough for our laws to keep up with this technology, and us as a society will have a hard time knowing where to pivot and not pivot. And so it takes a collective effort, things like this, to join, follow Chang and things like that, so that we can all understand this. But this is getting to the point where I'm going to predict that we're going to start seeing things outside of the U.S. Being done in healthcare that we wish we could do here. So it'll be really interesting to see what the next couple of even years will hold.
Okay, so my view, so what should you do if you are in this situation where you're trying to define, measure, and hold people accountable for their artificial intelligence competency? Okay, so let's just assume this is a good idea. This is where we're going. Maybe we need to start doing this. And incidentally, to the malpractice question, I believe that this is becoming more and more of an issue. And unless you do it, you're going to, it's like doing cosmetic surgery, which I'm also involved with. I mean, doing otolaryngology is one thing. Doing cosmetic surgery in otolaryngology is a entirely different story, and you pay more money for it. So unless you can demonstrate some level of competency to do it, not just to where you're practicing, but to the malpractice carrier, there are consequences. So I think it's the same model in AI. And maybe I'm wrong, but this is the way I see this playing out. So this first step is, I think, and I'm sort of involved in some of this, what are the competencies? How do you define what people should be able, the knowledge, skills, attitudes to practice the use of to incorporate the use of artificial intelligence in the practice with very specific use cases? Because again, to get back to when should you use a nerve monitor? In which case? Is it thyroid surgery? Is it parotid surgery? Is it any other kind of peripheral nerve surgery? I don't know. But it's because the results are going to differ. So that's number one. Number two is, so, okay, now we've defined the competencies. And actually, there's some information out there about what are AI competencies. Then the second is, how are you going to measure them? So a typical example would be that you need to be able to, let's just keep this simple. You need to demonstrate that you know how to understand the machine learning literature. And this could be a medical student competency, or it could be an OSCE, OSCE, Objective Standardized Clinical Experience Test, that every medical student these days is taking, to demonstrate that you are competent to do this. In other words, interpret the literature, interact with a patient using artificial intelligence in a simulated situation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you need a way to test it. Now, every single medical student going through an OSCE lab is not a way to scale every doctor in the United States. We're talking about 1 million practicing physicians. So there needs to be a way to do this. And then if someone doesn't demonstrate the competencies, what's the result? You retake the test until you get all the answers right, like that stuff we do with bloodborne disease modules. You keep taking it until you get 85% right. Now we're going to let you practice, that kind of thing. So that's where I think this is going, and I think it's going to take. Well, it is taking a lot of people trying to figure this out, how we're going to do this. Now, I think there is an entrepreneurial opportunity in all of this, because companies are creating ways to do what I just described. And someone asked a question, can AI solve any of these liabilities effectively? Yes, I think so. But the way that would work would be because now your competency is being continually monitored and assessed. In other words, lifelong learning. But the information that you have to provide, the analogy I would use is, are you competent to do a given procedure? And the only way to know that is the proof is in the pudding. So if you do 1,000 of anything and you never measure the results of the 1,000 that you've done, how do you know you're competent? More importantly, how does the patient know you're competent? So any thoughts about that stream of consciousness? Okay. Well, I guess what I would say is, don't be surprised if you're going to be asked to demonstrate competencies at a medical staff meeting or some re-credentialing process. And I think, the bottom line is the more people get involved with this, the better. Because like they say, if you're not, a seat at the table, you're on the menu. So I think that's how I would leave this. And I'm sorry about our legal expert having to be somewhere else, but those things happen. So I appreciate your participating in this, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session. So thanks a lot.